It is Monday, October 5th, 2020. It is 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and so you know what time it is. It's time for a little bit of coin metal. And it was a non-virtual, get your ass kicked at Jiu-Jitsu Monday. I finally felt like I was healed up enough that I could get back on the mat. And for the most part, I did everything. I did miss out on one or two bits during the warm-up still because, it's a little bit painful to be getting down on my knees. So things like shots and stuff, they're a little bit too painful to try and endure through. So I took those minor breaks, but I still sweated my ass off. Still figured out that I'm way overweight. Oh my God, man! I haven't stepped on a scale before today, and I'm up to 214. Feeling terrible about that. I mean, I was averaging, like, with the gi on, I was averaging like 198, 197 at the gym. It seems like I got up there around, like, I don't know, between there and like 205. That was like my floating point. You know, that anything, like, you know, where I was getting up to this weight again is usually when I'm, of course, injured, because otherwise I'd be at the gym. And so I had to take a little bit of time off because I knew that if I didn't, I'd just be whacking it and hitting it and whacking it and hitting it and bleeding all over the fucking mat. And I just wanted to let it heal up right, you know. And so, you know, part of healing, though, is of course exercising, and I think this is one of the aspects of recovery that has been really under enunciated when it comes to the Western mind with regard to a sports science kind of thing. You know, it seems like it's usually an on-off kind of thing where you're either training or you're not training because you're injured or you're sick. And I think that some training should be going on the entire time that you are down. You know, so like during the times when they were doing a couple things on the across the mat drills that I couldn't do, instead of just lounging, I was doing things like squats, you know, and stretching, you know, dynamic stretching and squats, and, you know, just keeping my body moving, you know, and trying to at least keep to the same pitch and tenor of the rest of the class, even though I wasn't doing the exact movements that they were doing. And so I think that, you know, again, that's one of those things, it's that I think a lot of people just, they don't really think about, you know. It's like the wearing of a mouthpiece the entire time that you're training, and no matter what kind of training you're doing. If you compete with a mouthpiece in, you should be training with a mouthpiece in. Period. Because you'll figure it out really quick why, you know. Like I know I did. The first time that I competed was the first time that I was wearing a mouthpiece, aside from one or two times in class. But I hadn't adopted the attitude of just wearing it constantly. And so I did my competition, and I gassed out so fucking quick, you know, because I was wearing this mouthpiece that I'm not used to. I wasn't used to wearing it. I wasn't accustomed to it, you know, and so I wasn't breathing right for having it in my mouth. And, you know, so like I said, I gassed out in like 15, 20 seconds, and then I was like trying to recover my breath as well as fight this guy off that was like easily 50, 60 pounds heavier than me. And so, anyway, just train with a goddamn mouthpiece and get used to it. You know, it's going to be in there obstructing your breath anyway, so you might as well get accustomed to it. And I found that conditioning myself to breathing more through my nose, it's really effective toward that, you know. And I'll never forget this. I was rolling with this gentleman, and I want to say he's like halfway through his purple belt, and he's really, really good. But this one time I was rolling with him, and it had been like, I want to say like 2 or 3 months since I'd rolled with him before. And I think he might have been coming back from an injury himself, so it's not really a fair estimation here. But nonetheless, I was rolling with him, and I had a dominant position, and I could feel him just like really panicked breathing, hard, fast breathing. And I'm like, man, he's going to gas out hard. And I checked my own breath, and I'm doing like these 10, 15 second long breaths between inhale and exhale, and I know he could feel it. So it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, you got your opponent is in a dominant position and in complete zen control of his fucking breath, and you're panicked out of your gourd. I mean, it's a really bad position to be in, and so I can only imagine what it was like for him, having gotten that much higher in rank than me, and he is a much better player than I am. But he had lost control of his breath, and he was having a lot of difficulty getting it back. But it was just funny because like there was a point where I know he noticed it, where he's like, "Man, he's not even breathing hard. What the fuck?" And so it's one of those things. You gotta work on your breath. You gotta work on your conditioning. It makes a big difference when you get on the mat. Anyway, but yeah, as far as what we covered, it was an omoplata setup from Rubber Guard, and it seemed really natural for me. Although I found that I do a couple different mount points than we were being shown. And like the one thing I remember the most was the transition to getting your leg up high enough to grip it. I found that the transition that was being instructed, for whatever reason, I kept skipping over it, and I think it was because my opponent / teammate was a bit heavier than I was. Both times I was working with two other guys, so both of them were a little bit heavier than me. And they would really come in hard, and so I think the fact that they were putting that much pressure on me kind of made me switch from doing it the way that was being instructed to doing it the way that I was doing it. And it's like you gotta like hold your opponent with a shin shield while you kick your leg back out from under your shin shield leg and get your foot up on their hip, and then control the descent in. And so I was doing that, except that I as soon as I could, I would get my foot out and hit that hip with it, get my foot up on the hip, and then I would extend it out while I was curling my leg up to get into that rubber guard. And I felt like that was the way to do it. But it's just my thing. It's just that's what felt natural to me. I was up on my right hip the way I was supposed to be, but it seemed like instead of extending back and doing a slow descent, that just getting that foot up on the hip and then controlling the distance and then bringing the leg up to hook into that rubber guard. And then transitioning from the rubber guard. And I didn't do the kung fu grip thing where you roll your arm up over your own toes to push them under your opponent's neck. And so one of the things that I did on that though is when I was pulling my foot around, I really had my opponent clamped down. And I was already kind of sitting up, where I'd pulled my hip out from under myself enough to kind of get that downward pressure on the back of the shoulder. And there's quite a few ways you can modify the pressure on that shoulder that makes the omoplata a very, very uncomfortable lock to be in. And one of my favorites is you get their tricep up over your other thigh, so you're pinching you got the one leg over the back of their shoulder, but you're pinching your other leg in, you're pinching their arm against or in between your legs, and then you reach over and you hook up under their arm and pull back. You do like a I don't know, just a regular little what's this grip? I can't even remember the name of the grip. Just a regular little gable grip, and pull back on that arm. That puts some not so nice pressure on that shoulder. But yeah, so the omoplata, it felt very natural to me, and one of the things I like to do on that is when you're in that position and you got that foot up on the hip, if you're still got space between their chest and the ground, what you do is you take that foot and you put it on the inside of their arm. So like on the crook of their elbow, or between their bicep and the forearm right there. You put your foot on that and push out on it. Now this will put them down on their face, or at least start them to that. And then you can go ahead and cross your feet over and swing a little bit to your right, assuming that you've got their right arm locked up. Lean over a little bit, put that pressure on the back of the shoulder, and then hook that arm. Make them tap, tap, tap. Yeah. So, that was today. An omoplata from the rubber guard. A lot of fun. And I don't think I've ever done that particular transition. I've done a transition from a full guard to an omoplata, but never a rubber guard to an omoplata. And it seems like with the rubber guard, you're already 50% there. It's just getting your foot up over their head, or around their head to the front of their neck, and kind of swinging out to your right side and dropping them down. Yeah. So anyway, let's go ahead and get down with some music. And we're going to start with Body Count. But what song? And I saw some people mentioning Body Count songs, and I got to think that it's you guys that are out there listening that just love the Body Count so much that you can't like avoid mentioning it yourself. And so I'm not taking any credit there, but I think it's pretty cool. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw down with something good. And it's been a while since I played this one, and so I think it's appropriate. So here it is, Body Count. Talk shit, get shot. Here on Coin Metal, First Dance. And that was Periphery with Alpha. And so, as far as what we're going to get into today, it seems that there is like no distance you can run from the things you've done in crypto. And I've always tried to be the most honest and just try and be useful to people in crypto as far as what I'm talking about and what I mention on the show. But there are some out there, and there have always been in crypto, those who are not satisfied with making money in a legitimate way, such as investing in hardware and mining, or hitting up fucking faucets, or exchanging goods and services that you actually fulfill on, and receiving payment and paying for things in cryptocurrency. These are all completely legitimate activities. But of course, there are some out there that are wanting to make their money by shilling things that they know, or maybe they don't know, are completely fraudulent, and or at least partially fraudulent, and or you are enriching yourself at least in some way dishonestly. These things happen, and there have been people in crypto this entire time that have been trying to do exactly that. Although I will say this, that it's come to my attention just by reading on Twitter that certain scammers, and I do call you guys scammers, and you know who I'm talking to, you know who you are, have been really quick to point the finger at other quote-unquote scammers or potential scammers, or we just don't know. You know, now I've read a lot of Mr. McAfee's presentation materials, and it's one of those things where you have to understand the nuance of vocabulary and the use thereof. And if you don't, you really have no business in crypto, because you do have to understand things like legal implications and, you know, what's a money transmitter and so on and so forth. What are licensed and regulated activities? You know, these are things that you have to be mindful of. And if you're not, you're going to run into some shit. The SEC is going to run into you. The IRS is going to run into you. Somebody's going to come after you and say, hey, yo, you're not supposed to be doing that. Give us money, or we're going to put you in a cell. You know? I mean, we're talking about money here, kids. Money. And it is the new money, I think. But, you know, again, we're not in familiar territory. You know, how to punish things like bad activities, you know, people promoting projects that maybe aren't all that great. Personally, I think that we should be treating it kind of like regulation does. See, I've come to think of regulation kind of like this, that one of the reasons why you don't see people receiving criminal sentences with a lot of these projects that run afoul of regulation and whatnot is that it's one of those things where if you do something and there is a regulatory entity that is in charge of licensing people or registering people that are doing these things and making them, you know, quote unquote official, you know, giving them the seal of approval, is that you're actually entering into a legal contract with that regulator. You know, so if you're issuing securities and you get licensed by the SEC, you are in a contract with the SEC. That's what your registration and licensure is all about, is enlisting you in this contract. And as long as you're fulfilling on the terms of the contract, everything is fine. But when you run afoul of the contract, you are now in breach of it. And at least in a civil perspective, you could be fines can be brought against you. And of course, the terms of such can be determined by the regulator, or if it actually goes to a court and is adjudicated there, by the judge. But the point being that it's not a... that's why these bankers don't go to jail when they fuck up, is because they run afoul of their regulatory entity, and it's a civil breach. It's a civil breach of contract, and so they're hit with fines. Now, of course, if they don't pay those fines or acknowledge those fines, then it can go further, and it can go into criminal court. But it has to go through several steps to get there. But the point being is that's why you don't see guys like Jamie Dimon or any of those guys going into prison, despite the fact that they're committing actual like fraudulent activities like money laundering and so on and so forth. You know, they self-report. You know, they filed the suspicious transaction report. But the regulatory entity that reads those reports and requires those reports, they just look at it and say, oh, okay, yeah, that happened. And personally, I believe that a lot of the reason why they don't do any kind of prosecution is these are funding mechanisms for covert wars all over this fucking planet. And it's not just the United States government that's involved in it, so you can just put down your finger before you go pointing. The point being is that governments engage in these activities. And they use these activities as vehicles, funding vehicles for these activities. And so the banks are encouraged by the regulatory entities to kind of overlook things, and you don't really need to pay too much attention to that one just because, it's paying for some bullets that need to be sent over here so that these people can shoot at those people and everybody's okay. Everybody's okay with it because, that's what we wanted to fund in some way. Never mind that it's illegal according to every international treaty that you've enrolled and signed in. Never mind any of that. That's just been the tenor that was set by a president back in Bush's era. Okay. And actually I think it was probably set way before then. It seems to me that stuff like this has been going on 60s, 70s, probably even in the 50s, maybe even earlier. And it's probably been like a continuous thing. I don't know. I think that it wasn't as continuous, or at least wasn't as much a matter of our engagement, or as much as high a percentage of our engagement with the rest of the world than it is right now. But at the same time, this is one of the places where I kind of agree with Trump, because it seems to me, to some extent, it seems to me that he's made certain moves that have either made that policy of trying to dominate all of the oil on the planet not pencil out, or something to that effect. That I think that there's been major disruptions in our trade with China, and that it was necessary to do so that more domestic production would be initiated, and we'd be seeing some of the manufacturing that's been just defaulting over to China just staying here. And to me, that's what that whole Make America Great business is all about, is realigning America as far as the dependency model that we're currently involved in. The idea that America's going to run the rest of the planet and all the quote-unquote resources. No. Nobody likes that idea. We're actually going to a different model. And it's because the dependency model is one that, it works great when you're the only people that can provide something. But we're coming into an era where the means of production can fit in your fucking garage. Everything you've ever needed. A computer, a laptop, a car, can be made in your fucking garage. And that's been true probably for the last 30, 40 years. But mostly only to people that know how to run big machines. CNC mills, CNC lathes, shit like that. People, machinists, engineers. But I got it on my Twitter feed. I've got this group of people that they 3D print gun parts. And the barrier between legal, illegal, it doesn't fucking exist. The whole gun debate, it's over. It is over. And I'll tell you why. You can make it illegal. You can make it even illegal to manufacture it. But it's not going to stop people from making it. And you could even look at the means of production and try and make that illegal too. You can probably you could try and make 3D printing illegal. And you know what's going to happen? People are going to make their 3D printers, and they're just not going to tell you about them. They're not going to be ordering them from a manufacturer where you could have at least tracked the purchase. Nope, that's all gone. Because they built the fucking thing in their garage out of spare parts. Or parts they had to order or whatever. But the point being is, there are instructional materials out there for making 3D printers. So the idea that you're going to strangle that, just forget about it. And it's better that you do forget about it. Because the fact of the matter is that you're going to make way more money if you forget about it. You just get out of its way. It's going to fucking come whether you want it to or not. And it can come in one of two ways. It can either be coming at you in a fucking gang of unregistered, unlicensed, completely invisible guns in the hands of people that you're not able to track and coming at you en masse. You know, it could come at you that way. But it could come at you in another way where, you know, on your Twitter feed, you know, maybe you're like me, that you're really into fishing. And people everywhere that are into fishing, you know, there's certain class of them that they aren't satisfied with the lures that are on the shelf. I'm one of those people. That's how I know they exist. And it's never in the colors that we want. And it's never in the sizes that we want. And it's never in the model that we want. There's always just one little glitch. You got to either get around with modifying the bait yourself, or, you know, special ordering it or something to that effect. You have to go above and beyond in order to acquire it. Now, imagine somebody like me. You know, I'm looking through my Twitter feed and somebody says, you know, custom crankbaits. Custom colors, custom sizes, custom. What do you want, man? I'll make it for you and send it to you. And I can pay that person in cryptocurrency, and I can order directly from them, and in a couple days it comes to me. That's the other way it could come to you. That's the other way that this could be helping us. Because if you think about it, you know, when those ghost guns are made and whatnot, those are kind of like endpoints. You know, I mean, somebody might turn around and physically and sell one physically after they manufactured it, but that's neither here nor there. We're not even going there. But the gun itself is an endpoint. It's an end product. And so, of course, would be the crankbait. But the end product doesn't actually make any more coming back. You know, so it's like if somebody buys a gun or makes a gun, and I think like the only things that would be additional, you know, that would create more economic activity would be this person buying like magazines and ammunition and maybe addendums to the firearm, and that in itself would be a positive in the economy. But you got to think, you know, what's a gun made for? It's made to put holes in stuff at about 700 feet per second. And if you don't want people to be putting holes in stuff at over 700 feet per second, and you would rather people go fishing, you get the fuck out of their way when it comes to making baits or, you know, making and selling things. And the easier you make it to make and sell stuff, the more money they will make in a legitimate manner, and the more that money will circulate in the clear economy rather than tucked away in a corner. You know, where I order up a custom firearm and I pay like $20-$30 in Monero for the 3D print design, and I have somebody mill out bore out a barrel for me, and I pay that guy like $50. But maybe I don't have $50, so maybe I exchange $50 worth of something else at an agreed upon exchange rate between me and him. And maybe I go to somebody for some PLA or whatever materials that I need to use to 3D print my product, or my firearm in this case. Now, all of this is economic activity that's happening that in and of itself is like an endpoint where, you know, the thing is transacted in cannabis or mushrooms or something like that, and the person's going to consume it, and that value is gone. You know, it's not creating any additional economic activity. But if I'm out there, the thing that I make is a 3D printer, and then I make stuff with the 3D printer for other people, or just designs of stuff to be printed out with a 3D printer, and that's the way I get by. I sell like 50, 60 copies a day, and I'm accumulating that, and then I'm accumulating it in crypto. And even though it's completely indistinguishable from any other transactive activity on that network, and even though you have no idea who I am or where I am or whatever, I have the money that I'm accumulating from this economic activity, this commerce, and now I can spend that out into the economy that is clear. So I could be buying things like gasoline and tobacco products and food and things that have sales taxes inbred into the price and stuff like that. And so the economy as a whole benefits from that activity. And the less I think you're scrutinizing or cataloging data concerning my purchasing activity, my purchasing activity, not just the activity itself, the more I'm going to engage in legitimate commerce. That's better for everybody, because I'm going to be buying a lot less guns, be buying a lot more fishing tackle. Anyway, so I got this thing here, and this guy, we know him well. We actually interviewed him once on the show, and I think to date it was probably the longest continuous interview with this man. But I'm not entirely certain on that. I've never gone back and checked to see if anybody had more than an hour with Mr. John McAfee. Because I'll tell you what, they didn't even have that much on on a documentary about him. So, and so yeah, I got this thing here. It's on Cointelegraph.com, and it's by Colin Post. So yes, penis. And let me refresh this so we know how long ago it was written. It was approximately 7 hours ago. SEC brings John McAfee to court over ICO promotion. Update: the Justice Department reports John McAfee has been arrested in Spain for tax evasion and is awaiting extradition to the United States. On Monday, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission filed suit against John McAfee for allegedly promoting initial coin offerings without disclosing the ICO issuers were paying him, a violation of U.S. securities law. Per the complaint, quote, from at least November 2017 through February 2018, McAfee leveraged his fame to make more than $23.1 million USD in undisclosed compensation by recommending at least 7, quote, initial coin offerings, or ICOs, to his Twitter followers. The SEC mentions 7 unidentified ICO issuers who privately communicated with McAfee's team to get him to publicly endorse their ICOs in exchange for payment in those coins and in Bitcoin. This is illegal and has previously provoked the commission to go after celebrities like DJ Khaled and Floyd Mayweather, who also promoted ICOs without disclosing their financial interests. The SEC's complaint refers to a famous moment in McAfee's long history of outlandish predictions for Bitcoin's price. He ultimately walked back on those predictions and claimed he had only been trying to draw public interest in Bitcoin. And so, yeah, I'm sure you all can remember where he said something like, you know, if Bitcoin didn't get to $1 million or something like that, he would eat his own dick. You have to listen very closely to what Mr. McAfee says. And I mean, it's a completely outlandish claim. I mean, really, if somebody said that to you, would you believe them? No. You would not believe that somebody's going to eat their own dick if Bitcoin doesn't get over $1 million. And if you believed that, you're a silly person to begin with. I really have nothing against what Mr. McAfee did. He received payment and he pimped. Hey, you want to call it unethical? You want to call it cheating? You want to call it criminal? Well, you're what's wrong. Yeah, I'm talking to you. You have the choice in any agreement. When you make that agreement, you have a choice in the matter. And if when you are evaluating the offer, if you aren't doing your due diligence, if you aren't paying attention to the fine print, that is your fault. The best you can do is pay attention to that material. Read the fucking white paper. Look at the project. Evaluate if anybody's even mining the fucking thing. How many people are mining it? How long have they been mining it? Is it something that they've been mining consistently, or somebody else has been mining consistently? These are all things that you need to be doing as an investor to ensure that you are putting your money to the proper place. It's not Mr. McAfee, it's not the SEC, it's not the IRS, it's not the CFTC, it's not the BIS, it's you. And so we're probably going to read through this complaint, at least from some of it. I don't know exactly when, but probably sometime today. But anyway, so yeah, I guess Mr. McAfee is finally being brought in, and I think it's unfortunate, but some of the stuff he invited upon himself with some of the claims that he was making, and the way that he was acting, taking payment for things and not indicating that you are taking payment for things, that's kind of deceptive behavior, John. If that's the case, if that's what happened. But at the same time, people got to pay attention to vocabulary. It's really funny. I was watching the debate, and I paid very, very close attention to vocabulary used. And it seemed like for once some people were actually doing that after the fact as well. And enough so that it kind of encouraged me, that people are starting to pay attention to the words that are said. But at the same time, I'm kind of disappointed because despite that, people are really selective about what they choose to listen to or pay attention to. And in doing so, they kind of miss the greater whole. And so with regard to Mr. McAfee and things he said and whatnot, again, people weren't paying close enough attention to what was being said, and it's coming back around to bite him in the ass. However, I don't believe that they're actually going to be able to get him for anything. That they're going to reevaluate things according to the words that were said, the actual words that were said. And Mr. McAfee will have an explanation that satisfies the expectations of the court and answers the question accurately to the best of his capability. And it will be found that he's probably not in a criminal violation. He didn't violate any how should I say it? He didn't fuck up. But I don't know. We'll find out. It is on you who you decide to invest with in this space. And There isn't anything the SEC can do, the CFTC. If you're investing with people that are bad operators, do so in bad faith, you're going to suffer for it. And that's simple fact. Anyway, I got some more on that. I was trying to find the... Here we go. Let me see if it... Oh, I did catch this one. And it's long been said that there's like institutional racism. Institutional racism, maybe not. Institutional pressure being put more on poor people than on rich people. I would say definitely yes. And we got this thing here. It's on ProPublica.org. IRS. Sorry, but it's just easier and cheaper to audit the poor. And this is by Paul Keel, and it was authored on October 2nd, 2019. That's amazing. I didn't understand it was this old, but we're going to read it anyway because I think it's interesting. The IRS audits the working poor about the same rate as the wealthiest 1%. Now, in response to questions from a U.S. senator, the IRS has acknowledged that's true, but profess it can't change anything unless it is given more money. ProPublica reported the disproportionate audit focus on lower-income families in April. Lawmakers confronted IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig about the emphasis, citing our stories, and Senator Ron Wyden, Oregon, asked Rettig for a plan to fix the imbalance. Rettig readily agreed. Last month, Rettig replied with a report, but said the IRS has no plan and won't have one until Congress agrees to restore the funding it slashed from the agency over the past 9 years, something lawmakers have shown little inclination to do. On the one hand, the IRS said auditing poor taxpayers is just a lot easier. The agency uses relatively low-level employees to audit returns for low-income taxpayers who claim to have earned income tax credit. The audits, of which there were about 380,000 last year, accounted for 39% of the total the IRS conducted, are done by mail and don't take too much staff time either. They are, quote, the most efficient use of available IRS examination resources, Rettig's report says. On the other hand, auditing the rich is hard. It takes senior auditors hours upon hours to complete an exam. What's more, the letter says, quote, the rate of attrition is significantly higher among these more experienced examiners. As a result, the budget cuts have hit this part of the IRS particularly hard. For now, the IRS says while it agrees auditing more wealthy taxpayers would be a good idea, without adequate funding, there's nothing it can do. Quote, Congress must fund and the IRS must hire and train appropriate numbers of auditors to have appropriately balanced coverage across all income levels, the report said. Since 2011, Republicans in Congress have driven cuts to the IRS enforcement budget. It's more than a quarter lower than its 2010 level, adjusting for inflation. Recently, bipartisan support has emerged in both the House and the Senate for increasing enforcement spending, but the proposals on the table are relatively modest and would not restore the budget to pre-cut levels. However, even in a proposed small increase might not come to pass because it's unclear whether Congress will actually pass any appropriations bills this year. In response to Rettig's letter, Wyden agreed in a statement that the IRS needs more money, quote, but that does not eliminate the need for the agency to begin reversing the alarming trend of plummeting audit rates of the wealthy within its current budget. Yeah. Steal more from the rich. That's what Mr. Wyden is saying. But as we've said, the fact of the matter is if that money were not taxed to begin with, more of it probably would have went into taxable events, such as fishing trips and shit like that. And they would have received enough funding for the IRS and so on and so forth. Although I would be just as fine if the IRS were abolished entirely. I don't really see a need for it. I think that if people want something, they will pay for it. It's like people want risk. And so what do? They invest in things like cryptocurrencies and DeFi. But it's risk that they're willing to take for themselves. They're not asking you to take that risk. They're doing it themselves. And so the idea of the IRS chasing after them for whatever profits they make from those ventures, I think it's just silly. If they really wanted what the IRS was there to fund, they would be funding it themselves. They would be dedicating funds to it themselves. And so, it is with that I want to go ahead and throw down with some music. And it's just thinking about this song, and it kind of comes to mind any time that I do think about the IRS. And so here it is. Suicidal Tendencies. Send me your money. Here on Coin Metal. And that was Necryptic. I couldn't actually tell you what song it was because I unfortunately did not add the metadata on that. Although I can tell you it was off of the album Sickness Sets In or something to that effect. I think it's Sickness Sets In, or I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's the name of the album. If you're interested in that stuff. But yeah, that was a band that I became familiar with. They're kind of a local band up here in Oregon. But anywho, as far as this complaint goes, I think we should at least go through the synopsis, the summary, and see what we see about it. And so, this is Plaintiffs' Securities and Exchange Commission for its complaint against defendants John David McAfee, and Jimmy Gale Watson, collectively defendants, alleges as follows. Summary. McAfee is a businessman. Let's see here. Scroll that there. Businessman and computer programmer with hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers from at least November 2017 through February 2018. McAfee leveraged his fame to make more than $23.1 million in undisclosed compensation by recommending at least 7, quote, initial coin offerings, or ICOs, to his Twitter followers. The ICOs at issue involved the offer and sale of digital asset securities, and McAfee's recommendations were materially false and misleading for several reasons. Number 2, first, McAfee did not disclose that he was being paid to promote the ICOs by the issuers, the companies selling the securities in the ICOs. Promoting a security without disclosing that you are being paid to do so is unlawful, quote, touting, and violates the federal securities laws. The ICOs McAfee touted raised at least approximately $41 million, and John McAfee made approximately $23.2 million in secret compensation for his touts. When directly asked if he was being paid for these promotions, McAfee lied to investors by falsely denying he was being paid by the issuers. Number 3, second, McAfee falsely claimed to be an investor and or technical advisor when he recommended several ICOs, creating the impression that he had vetted these companies, that they were benefiting from his technical expertise, and that he was willing to invest his own money in the ventures. In reality, McAfee's tweets were paid promotions disguised as impartial investment advice. Third, after a blogger exposed McAfee's paid promotions and he could no longer generate interest in ICOs with tweets, McAfee was still holding a large number of virtually worthless securities from the ICOs he had previously touted. To cash out, McAfee encouraged investors to purchase the securities sold in certain of the ICOs without disclosing that he was simultaneously trying to sell his own holdings, and paid another third-party promoter to tout the securities. 5. Finally, McAfee engaged in a practice known as scalping as to at least one digital asset security by accumulating large amounts of the digital asset security and touting it on Twitter without disclosing his intent to sell it. Scalping generally allows promoters to sell their securities holdings quickly and profitably, through market interest that they deceptively generate, and violates the federal securities laws. 6. Unless, of course, J.P. Morgan does it, then it's okay. 6. Defendant Watson was McAfee's bodyguard. He also substantially assisted John McAfee's touting and scalping schemes. Among other things, Watson negotiated the deals with ICO issuers. Seeking promotions helped McAfee monetize the proceeds of his promotions, and directed his then-wife to tweet fake interest in an ICO that McAfee was promoting at the behest of the issuer. 7. McAfee was paid in Bitcoin and Ether worth more than $11.6 million, plus an additional $11.5 million worth of promoted tokens as undisclosed compensation for his promotions of seven ICOs. McAfee paid Watson at least $316,000 for his role. Violations. 8. By virtue of the foregoing conduct and as alleged further herein, Defendant McAfee violated Section 17A and 17B of the Securities Act of 1933, Securities Act 15 U.S.C. 77Q, subsection A and B, and Section 10B of the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934, Exchange Act 15 U.S.C. 78B, and Rule 10B subsection 5 A through C, thereunder 17 CFR 241.10B subsection 5 A through C. B. Defendant Watson violated Section 17A 1 and 3 of the Securities Act, Section 10B of the Exchange Act, Rules 10B, subsection 5A and C, thereunder, and aided and abetted McAfee's violations of Section 17A and 17B of the Securities Act and Section 10B of the Exchange Act, Rule 10B, subsection 5A through C, thereunder, in violation of Section 15B of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. 17O, subsection B, and 20 C of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. 78R, R 78T E. I would assume that was subsection E. 9. Unless defendants are restrained and enjoined, they will engage in acts, practices, transactions, and courses of business set forth in this complaint, or in acts, practices, transactions, and course of business of similar type and object. Nature of the proceedings and relief sought. The SEC brings this action pursuant to the authority conferred upon it by Sections 20B and 20D of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. 77T-B and 77T-D, and Section 21D of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. 78U, subsection D. And so, yeah, I don't know that I want to go through all the rest of this. Yeah, why not? We're almost to the end of it. The SEC seeks final judgment, permanently enjoining defendants from violating federal securities laws and rules this complaint alleges they have violated. B. Ordering defendants to disgorge all ill-gotten gains they received as a result of the violations alleged herein, and to pay pre-judgment interest thereon, pursuant to Section 21D5 of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. 78U-D, subsection 5, C, ordering defendants to pay civil money penalties pursuant to Section 20D of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. 77T, subsection D, Section 21D, Section 21D, 3 of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. 78, blah, 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 permanently prohibiting McAfee from serving as an officer or director of any company that has a class of securities registered under Section 12 of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. 78, or that is required to file reports under 15D of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. 78O, subsection D, pursuant to Section 21D2 of the Exchange Act, permanently prohibiting defendants from participating directly or indirectly in the issuance, purchase, offer, or sale of any digital asset security, and F, ordering any other or further relief the court may deem appropriate or necessary for the benefit of investors. Jurisdiction and venue. The court has jurisdiction over this action pursuant to Section 22D or 22A of the Securities Act, 15 U.S.C. 77V, subsection A, Section 27 of the Exchange Act, 15 U.S.C. 78AA. Defendants directly and indirectly have made use of the means or instrumentalities of interstate commerce or of the mails in connection with the transactions, acts, practices, and courses of business alleged herein. 14. Venue lies in this district under Section 22A, blah, blah, blah. Certain of the acts, practices, transactions, and course of business alleged occurred in this district. At least one of the defendant's victims resides in this district, and defendants converted into USD some digital assets obtained from ICOs using a service within its principal place of business in Manhattan. John, you shouldn't have done any business in the United States, and you probably would have been fine. So yeah, it's real interesting that they should be leveling these complaints against Mr. McAfee. I'm just going to say that it's been no secret that, there have been certain entities that have requested funds for John McAfee's endorsement of their products, and not necessarily associated with Mr. McAfee in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, it was a type of scam for a short period of time where people would claim that they had some sort of association or affiliation with Mr. McAfee, and it would later be found that he had no connection with them, had no interest in them, did not have any of their tokens, and in fact was not paid by them to promote it in any way, shape, or form. But nonetheless, they did ask for money from people in Telegram, in Discord, and on Twitter, and on Facebook, and in other places. So yeah, I just got to say it, buyer beware. That has never ceased to be true in crypto. It's probably never going to cease to be true in crypto. And there isn't anything the SEC can do about it. You know, the idea that they're going to somehow prohibit Mr. McAfee from participating in crypto projects in the future, it's impossible. If the man is sentenced to anything, does his time and gets out, there's nothing that they can do to prohibit him from leaving the United States or get outside of any area of jurisdiction that's going to extradite Mr. McAfee back into the United States and get on with whatever. I mean, we could be talking about like Taiwan or Indonesia or some shit like that, where they're not going to bring Mr. McAfee in, and he could be participating in legitimate projects or illegitimate projects, and there won't be a damn thing that anybody can do about it. But this freedom and whatnot is not limited to Mr. McAfee. Everybody else out there has it too. Now, did he use his celebrity among the crypto community in an ill-advised manner? Probably. But I don't know anybody in this space who hasn't at some point or another. The depth and breadth of it, again, that was up to other people to give to him. You know, he didn't put a gun to anybody's head, at least not to my knowledge. I mean, you got to wonder sometimes. But to my knowledge, he never put a gun to anybody's head, saying, give me money to pimp your project. So as far as I'm concerned, everybody got what they were expecting, and if they invested on his advice alone, that is their fault. That was their folly. And, I don't believe they're deserving of any recompense. But anyway, let's get a little bit further on, though. I got this thing here. It's on Bloomberg.com. And this is by Jonathan Browning. So, yes, penis. Banker walks free from insider trading charge after deleting WhatsApp. And this is authored on September 29th, 2020 at 11:50 p.m. PDT. Konstantin Vishniak did one thing before he handed the second of his two iPhones to the police officer arresting him. He deleted WhatsApp. 2 years later, a London jury acquitted him of destroying documents that he knew would be crucial to an investigation into his trading activity. The banker admitted removing the application from his phone, but said he did so to keep his friendship with one of the most wanted men in Britain a secret. Monday's verdict is a blow to the UK Financial Conduct Authority, which rarely brings cases to trial, and pursued this case after dropping an insider trading investigation against Vishniak and two other men. And it raises questions over what financial prosecutors can do when they suspect someone is trying to hinder an investigation. One thing here, you notice this article does not identify the other two men. So I would probably suggest that one of the two other men was caught doing business with one or more UK government officials, probably somebody in the Financial Conduct Authority itself. Continuing on, quote, It's a difficult offense to prosecute, and more difficult these days because of the way people communicate with each other, said Tim Thomas, who formerly worked at the FCA on enforcement cases. Quote, if individuals are smart enough to use WhatsApp or Signal and then delete communications, it becomes very difficult to prosecute. The FCA needed to persuade the jury that when the 42-year-old banker destroyed the messages, he did so knowing they would be relevant to the investigation. Quote, I wasn't thinking about that, said Vishniak. I was deleting my private information. This has nothing to do with my shares. More embarrassing. Vishniak's lawyer told the jury that the chats contained content that was, quote, far more embarrassing because Vishniak was exchanging messages with Andrei Logovoy, a politician who's wanted by British cops for the poisoning of former Russian security officer Alexander Litvinenko in 2006. The FCA said the ruling wouldn't change how it approaches prosecutions. Quote, we will take action whenever evidence we need is tampered with or destroyed, the FCA said in a response to the ruling. The case has echoes of other high-profile criminal trial where a jury cleared Rebecca Brooks and her husband Charlie of a charge of perverting the cause of justice by hiding laptops and DVDs from the police after phone hacking at the News of the World tabloid triggered a national scandal. Charlie Brooks said the computers contained pornography rather than any information that would have influenced the investigation. I would suggest it would depend on the nature of the pornography and who was involved. And even when prosecutors did get a conviction earlier this year, it wasn't a huge win. A London judge fined the daughter of a billionaire mining mogul £800, that was $1,027, for failing to comply with a demand to hand over documents as part of an investigation into her father. Careful targets. In choosing its targets, the FCA has to be very careful, said Neil Swift, a white-collar crime lawyer at Peters & Peters. The agency needs more than a simple fact of deletion to bring a case, he said. There will be other cases where it's not so clear-cut, but having chosen this particular case to pursue, it does leave them with a little bit of egg on their face, Swift said. The Vishniak trial was a bold step for the, quote, risk-averse FCA, which has historically shied away from bringing large numbers of cases to trial, said Thomas, the former prosecutor who now works for law firm Richardson Lissack. Quote, when they do bring cases, they don't tend to lose. The FCA closes more cases than it opened into suspected insider trading in the year to March, according to its most recent enforcement data. It had a total of 88 cases outstanding. Quote, the FCA would have known it would turn on whatever Vishniak's case was, Thomas said, but still the FCA is saying, okay, we accept that the technology is not necessarily in our favor, but if we are investigating insider trading and you destroy the evidence, we won't just drop it. But you have. I believe that this is a case of selective prosecution, and it's due to the principles involved. Because it's not John McAfee, they aren't bothering to pursue it. And I think ultimately that's probably one of the things that's going to keep McAfee out of prison, is the fact that he had probably dealt with some high-profile individuals at one point or another in his ICO interactions, and who he was giving information to, and at what time, and that these disclosures will be made, of course, privately. And of course, there will, of course, be some conditions of public anonymity concerning them. But ultimately, these are the kind of tools that McAfee will employ to his advantage. Because, the fact of the matter is that is exactly what's happened. It's like this thing right here we're looking at, where the banker walks free from insider trading charge. Again, they ran into where one of the principals he was benefiting in his ventures was a political official, probably one of their bosses. And that's where the investigation stopped. And I've said again and again that this is what's going to happen in crypto. And it's one of the reasons why there is, a decade later, such ambiguity when it comes to regulatory, partitions and whatnot, of what kind of crimes they're going to be pursuing and how they're going to prosecute them and so on and so forth. The reason why there's been so much ambiguity is that invariably the cases that they choose to pursue are ones that do not involve any of the people either investigating or those that set up their regulatory frameworks are involved in the criminal activity. But like I said, any time that a piece of legislation comes up that could potentially call a legislator or a relative of a legislator into being a criminal or bringing them into criminal investigations, invariably, that's where it stops. The accusation comes up, and that's where it stops. And so it's one of the comforts that I have in crypto, that, as long as you're not doing things like knowingly funding terrorism or some shit like that, you can probably be certain that you're out in the clear. Now, of course, the volume of business that you do might call you into question, but if you're doing your due diligence with your data segregation, it should be you should just be noise on these networks. You should just be noise, not noticeable at all. And that is one of the reasons why cryptocurrencies even exist. Is that you can look at the raw data, but what it ultimately will tell you is that leaving it alone is the best policy, because the vast majority of the transactions that are happening are for goods and services, are for things like remittances and whatnot. And then you just look at it and you say, did the transfer happen? Were all of the principals involved satisfied with their conditions of their agreement? The exchange rate that was set between the two parties involved, were they satisfied? If they're not bringing a direct complaint, you could probably assume that they are. And so again, it's one of those things in cryptocurrencies, because the nature of the transactions, in most cases where we're doing things on chain, the transaction is happening from one person to another, peer to peer. And so it reduces the number of entities that need to be satisfied by any transaction down to two parties. I mean, really, you can't get any better than that. One of those two people fucks up, then you might have a case. But as long as the transaction clears and the funds go from one wallet to another and there's no trickery involved, everybody cool, everybody happy. And we can see that to this day on Bitcoin, where there will be transfers, large transfers typically, going from undisclosed wallet to undisclosed wallet. We have no idea who that is. That could be one exchange going from one exchange to another, or it could be from one private entity going to another private entity in a fucking dark alley somewhere. We do not know. And you know what? I don't fucking care. And the less I care about it, the more legitimate and transparent it will remain. because it doesn't have any reason to hide from me. And as long as it's out in the open, we can examine it. We can say, you know what? This seems to go, the majority of the transactions on this network seem to be going to funding terrorism and shit that I really don't like. That being the case, I'm not going to transact in that currency because I don't even want to be associated by implication with the kind of activity that's happening on that network. That is the kind of power that you have as a participant in cryptocurrencies. And this power will be fleshed out in the not so distant future. I believe that as more monetary activity and commerce is happening and being denominated solely in cryptocurrencies and transacted exclusively in cryptocurrencies without any association or affiliation with fiat currency transactions, the more that happens, the more we're going to see legitimate transactions happening on those networks. And it's going to be then the task of bankers and whatnot to catch up and be as legitimate. And they're going to find that they can't be, because so much of the activity that's happening on their networks is supporting criminal activity. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw back down with some music. And you know, we haven't played any fucking prong today. I can't believe that happened. And so we're definitely going to have to resolve that one. And so I got one here that I've been wanting to play because it's kind of new by them. Let me see, where is it? And so here it is, Age of Defiance by Prong, here on Coin Metal. And that was Sixth with Weavers of Woe. Yeah, and so we're kind of bringing it to the end here, and of course, my program's trying to cheese out on me. It has been for a moment or two. I guess I've got at least 6 tabs more than I need to have open at the moment. So we're going to have to close out on the program, then we're going to start back up again, because, well, you know, that's just the kind of service that we get when we're using freeware. But, you know, hey, we've been getting by this long on it. Not much motivation to change. Although, you know, I'm sure at some point I will. And it's with that I'd like to bring this episode to a close. Thank you very much for listening. I certainly do appreciate the support. We will be back again on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so until then, I want y'all to trade safe. Do your homework. And watch out for your own bunghole, because nobody else is going to do it for you. And so as far as our last dance is concerned, I had it picked out. And of course, the program cheesed out on me, and so I had to go back and find it again. But I have. And so, where is it? I had it here. Here we go. And so, our last dance, Static X, Down. Last dance here on Coin Metal. Thank you again for listening, and y'all have an excellent evening. Good night.